So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim Donahue, and I have the privilege of serving as President and CEO here at Old Sturbridge Village. I also serve as President and CEO of Old Sturbridge Academy, which is the village's public charter school located here on campus, and now as well Coggeshall Farm Museum. It's great to be here with you this afternoon. We're excited to have this opportunity to share some of the work that we've been doing in partnership with Coggeshall Farm. I'm going to let my colleagues on this workshop introduce themselves, then I can frame for you kind of our plan for how we'll spend the hour this afternoon. Upstairs for me is my colleague here at Old Sturbridge Village, Rhys Simmons. Rhys.
Hi, my name is Rhys Simmons. I'm the Director of Interpretation here at Old Sturbridge Village. I've been working everything from a frontline interpreter to my current role for the last 15 years. Just this past year, I had the wonderful opportunity to serve a similar type role for Coggeshall Farm Museum. And we'll be talking a lot about how the two institutions align, but living history has been a passion of mine. Costume interpretation has been a passion of mine. And this partnership kind of aligns with those kind of career goals. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. So with that, I kick it over to Mr. Lake.
Good afternoon, folks. My name is Steve Lake. I'm the current board chair at Coggeshall Farm Museum. I've been on the board and involved with Coggeshall since late 2005, and in those almost 15 years now that I've been involved with Coggeshall, we've seen a lot of really great things kind of come and go, and the opportunity that presented itself at the beginning of 2020 to partner with Old Sturbridge Village was really a dream come true for all of us at Coggeshall. Obviously, the year then presented another round of very incredible challenges, and I would say that all things considered, as we approach the close of this first year, actually quite a lot has been accomplished, and there's a lot of enthusiasm and excitement about what the future will bring once we sort of land on the other side of the pandemic. And I really would like to thank Jim Donahue and the entire Sturbridge team for the great first year and really for an exciting future.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Right back at you. Thank you, Rhys. So I thought what we would do this afternoon is share with you a little bit about how this partnership came to be and the path that Coggeshall Farm took prior to discussions with Old Sturbridge Village. Then we'll share with you some details about the partnership itself and what we negotiated before 2020 started. Then we'll take you through the year a little bit and give you some highlights and some challenges. Toward the end of our presentation, we'll talk about what worked really well for us in the last year, what didn't work as well as we thought it would, and kind of lessons we've learned that if other institutions are interested in doing these partnerships, some of the things that we thought were essential to making it work. So I'm going to turn it back over to Steve, who's just been a fantastic volunteer chair for Coggeshall, to talk you through how we wound up even talking to one another. Steve?
Okay, great. Thanks, Jim. As you'll see, one of the first bullet points on the presentation is just the challenge that Coggeshall has had. Really, I've experienced it from, again, as I noted, late 2005 through 2018. And in those 14 years, almost 15 years, we went through a total of 5 farm managers. And then in 2015, we moved to a different model and we hired our first executive director. And ultimately, her efforts, and during her first year at the farm, she reached out to Jim at Sturbridge to get some pointers and some ideas about how we could leverage our property and just different things that we should consider. Again, as I noted, the first 5 years we had the farm managers, and the last 2 from 2015 through 2018 we had the executive directors. And the first of his executive director, who came on in 2015, she hired the young woman who ultimately succeeded her and did a really wonderful job, and helped to implement numbers of programs and created some really great resources for the farm. But as is often the case with small organizations and museums like Coggeshall, limited resources, and those people, the folks who held those positions, they wore all the hats. So whether you were the farm manager or the executive director, pretty much whatever it needed to be done, you had to figure out how to make that happen. Small staffs, usually never more than 2 or 3 people on staff during those first 14 years that I was involved. And then, as noted, in late 2018, and again, not able to offer a great salary and really no benefits. And the most recent executive director who left us in 2018, she was admittedly burnt out. Maintained a really great relationship with her. She left Coggeshall, and kind of a nice ending to that story. Subsequently, she came back. So she's now back at Coggeshall Farm, and she's made a huge difference in this first year in this partnership. And it is noted, when she left in 2018 and early 2019, the board realized, okay, we really have to come up with some solution and a way of moving this organization forward. Our first executive director helped us launch an initiative where we looked into entering into a partnership with a major university, talked with that school's president, and met with members of our board and the director of the Department of Environmental Management at Rhode Island. We lease our property from the state. We're adjacent to Colt State Park and are technically part of the park. And it was a great conversation, a lot of excitement, and just as noted, due to some leadership transitions at this university, it derailed the partnership. Early 2019, realizing that we really needed to find a way to solve our challenges, spoke with a strategic planner who's been involved with the farm for a number of years. And what she was able to do was suggest, or what she did, I should say, is she just found a way for us to have some discussions with Jim Donahue and the folks at Old Sturbridge Village. And in early spring of 2019 began that conversation with Jim, some of the members of his board, and some of the Old Sturbridge Village team. And I think I'll now pass this back to Jim so he can talk a little more in depth about, from his perspective, what he saw in this kind of a partnership and this kind of alliance.
Great, thanks, Steve. So when Steve and a couple of his board colleagues approached us, I was intrigued by this. We knew Coggeshall Farm Museum at the village. Some of our staff members had been down to the farm, including Rhys, who's on this call, and done some programming. And what struck me about the board was that they really were trying to think outside of the box about how to ensure that this small museum, with an operating budget of about $200,000 to $300,000 a year, could really survive and then actually grow and become bigger. And I was just very struck by that and their commitment to living history and to outdoor history. So when Steve initiated the conversations with us, I remember saying to Rhys, is this something you really want to do? Because if it's not something you really want to do, I can pull back from it. And he was all about it because he's very committed to living history. So we started to convene a seat at the boards and came to, by I think, the end of the summer, beginning of the fall of 2019, had kind of developed what we thought would be a good model for a pilot year or two of the partnership. And what I think we were trying to test is whether, for the same cost that Coggeshall Farm Museum would incur to hire one executive director, they could contract with us here at Old Sturbridge Village, and we could bring to the table pieces of a number of people at our management team who would be able to provide expertise in those areas and just increase the bandwidth of what Coggeshall would be able to do. So the staff that we committed to this project included myself, our CFO in our accounting department, who handles all of the receivables and payables and preparing the financial statements for the farm, a chief marketing officer and her team, which include our digital media specialists, our PR manager, our graphic design team, and then of course Rhys and all of the resources that he brings to the farm from the program side. And here at the museum, Rhys oversees everything from volunteers to costumes interpretation to special events to retail food for the visitor. I'm sure, Rhys, I'm forgetting a few things that you do, but you cover quite a few bases. And so he was able to leverage those departments as well. Got a great photo here of Coggeshall Farm, the entrance. And then in the next slide, Rhys, I think what essentially happens is Coggeshall contracted with Old Sturbridge Village this year for the $60,000 that they would have paid for an executive director with Fringe. We've included all the services I talked about, including board support. And then Rhys actually oversees the staff at the farm museum. So as Steve pointed out, we were able to hire 2 staff members full-time at the beginning of the calendar year when we took over management, thanks to some funding from some very generous donors who believed that this partnership could actually result in a better future for Coggeshall. So we put a program coordinator on the ground full-time at Coggeshall, paid by Old Sturbridge Village. That gets billed back to Coggeshall Farm. And that is Eleanor Langham, who is our previous executive director at the farm. And then we also hired a full-time farm manager. And then with Rhys's help, we were able to bring in more staff. So I'll turn it over to Rhys to walk you through the next slide.
Yeah, so the reason why I felt really strongly, when Jim presented this as a possible partnership that I think it could succeed is that there's so many overlapping interests that Coggeshall Farm Museum had and Old Sturbridge Village had. My history with Coggeshall Farm actually dated back to an earlier ALFAM conference back in the early 2010s that got me involved with the existing farm manager at the time, got me actually go down there and do a couple costumed programs for the site during some of their fall events. And I really fell in love with the site in the sense of its landscape. It has a lot of the same characteristics that Old Sturbridge Village has in that kind of immersive part of their education, right? So, one of the things at Old Sturbridge Village that I've always experienced is that piece that once a visitor is at the site, they can kind of go in a lot of different directions, and I think that the Coggeshall Farm Museum definitely brought that to it. And it also expands living history, right? So costumed interpretation isn't something that everybody sees as as vital to education. And I really think that costume interpretation has a lot of potential to grow and expand in kind of relating the history to today and kind of increasing the that presence. So another thing that the farm has been really instrumental in Old Sturbridge Village, aligns with this, is this kind of learning through experience, learning through doing, learning through, practicing the history from whether it be farming, gardening, household management, the various other skills, the blacksmithing, woodworking, and so forth. So it's that kind of learning through kind of doing is really at the core of a lot of what living history, brings to the museum field and education, as a whole. So I really felt strongly that, with myself and I'm a small piece to the overall pie because people like our crafts coordinator has been heavily involved in working down there to get the blacksmith shop up and going. Our household leads and experts have been instrumental in kind of moving that ball down the road to our current farm manager, a role that I used to have at Old Sturbridge Village, to our current farm manager, helping out Coggeshall's farm manager in kind of strategizing around how to interpret a farm, how to care for the animals. A wonderful partnership that actually Steve Lake and the board had the year before with Donahue Vines Farm, which we can talk a little bit about down the road. But it's that piece to the program pie that I felt as though that with fairly minimal amount of our time in the grand scope of things, that we could have a large impact on an institution like Coggeshall.
So just to hit on the win-win for a second, Rhys, if we go back to that previous slide,
Yep.
I'll turn it back over to you. Obviously for Coggeshall, they're going to get a better bandwidth for the same money they would pay for one person. They're getting the talent of a team of upwards of more than a dozen. For the village, I saw it as an opportunity really to expand our regional brand and to get a ground game in Rhode Island. And so, one of the things that we're really trying to do is make sure that living history, we're on the ground where it's happening and we're able to really push it. And so it's been a great opportunity for Old Sturbridge Village to get exposure in Rhode Island, being part of that community, both for donors, but also for members and certainly for visitors. And I think one of the things we saw right away pre-pandemic was quite a bit of opportunity on the revenue side. So we saw a chance to take some of the very successful revenue generating programs that we have done at Old Sturbridge Village and adapt them for Coggeshall Farm Museum for a new audience. And definitely, as Rhys has pointed out, both institutions just complement one another's mission, commitment to preservation of living New England history. So we felt that there was a lot of mission synergy that we could leverage for staffing, professional development, new program development. So for us, we saw definitely a win-win for both organizations. So Rhys, I'll turn the next slide back to you.
All right, yeah, so managing the farm museum, this was going to be something that was a new endeavor for me, which I was really excited to kind of see what it was like to manage a site that was remote from Sturbridge. And I think one of the key things that I found in this was, of course, living history, much like a lot of museums, as I'm sure all of you can attest to this, is really based upon the people that you're working with. I think that that's actually first and foremost the most important resources that Old Sturbridge Village has is its staff, across departmental, and the most important thing that we could do initially, of course, is get the right staff down there at Coggeshall. As Jim alluded to, I think the first and the most important person to that we brought in was the former executive director, whom had a successful tenure there previously, knew the site, knew the clientele, knew and was fully committed to the mission of Coggeshall Farm Museum. So we were extremely lucky to have the ability to bring that person back in the fold. So therefore, not only can she bring what she knows from the site itself and the history of the site and the potential of the site, but then she also knew what resources that she needed to ask us for. What are the gaps that Coggeshall Farm Museum story had that Old Sturbridge Village has here that we can then help, kind of fill that gap. So that was, hiring the right staff is absolutely the most fundamental. We were able to really hire a successful farm manager. Once again, somebody a little bit outside the museum world, which I think is something that I do like to do, often, is kind of bring in a different perspective. So this person actually had more of an animal background, animal expertise. So we were able to bring that person on. He was able to spearhead and cultivate the relationship with Donahue Vines Farm, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And he was able to grow there. And then what we were able to do is also hire some seasonal interpreters. This is a model that Old Sturbridge Village has. It's a model that Coggeshall Farm Museum, of course, had. But what we were able to do is kind of have a baseline of how many interpreters we wanted to have at the site on any specific open day, because we knew that there's a certain amount of interpreters, whether they be costumed or non-costumed, which, as the season progressed, we got more and more into costume, as we were able to rehab the existing costume inventory, and we're able to utilize some of the costume inventory up here at Old Sturbridge Village, and we're continuously working through that through. We were able to provide that kind of immersive experience that I think was really good. So we were able to hire one essentially extra farmhand, if you will, so that this person was focused a little bit more on the farm story, rebuilding the farm fence, doing a lot of the grounds work, and then we're able to have someone focused in on textiles, which I think is another, and the kind of the domestic skills, which is another really important piece to, of course, 1790s interpreting. So we're able to find somebody that was extremely excited, extremely skilled already. So she came into this position with a lot of hand skills and knowledge that we were really benefited in having. So that was really the most important thing, was to bring this core kind of team together to really perpetuate the story that we're trying to tell and make some positive momentums despite all the challenges that 2020 had. And we'll get into some of the things that we wish we had the time to do and had the resources to do, but for this year, things did move a little bit slower. So one of the first things that I did when I was trying to, envision what the visitor experience, so we talk a ton up at Old Sturbridge Village about visitor experiences. We're going through an NEH project right now that's really focused on revitalizing and updating the visitor experience here at Old Sturbridge Village, making sure it's academically rigorous, making sure that we're hitting upon all the topics that the average visitor might miss, in their visitor experience here at Old Sturbridge Village. So I wanted to bring a lot of that kind of critical thinking to Coggeshall Farm when I was thinking of it kind of as Steve Lake and other board members, presented to us when we were early on in this conversation, is like, think of this place as kind of a blank slate. You have the mission, you have the core, you have the facility here, but kind of re-envision the site. So one of the key things that I thought of is really kind of extending out the visit, right? So make each visit really purposeful. So one of the things that we really experienced some success in up here at Old Sturbridge Village was kind of thinking about what the total experience of the visitor is and making sure that that experience makes sense to the visitor. So from orientation to experience to conclusion, what are those steps? So what we did is we kind of extended out the site a little bit. So instead of, going the first stop to the farmhouse, the first stop is actually this long kind of meandering pathway up that kind of gets you up to the site in a way where you're encountering certain signage, which once again, signage, when I was talking with Eleanor in her first tenure, signage was always an opportunity that she just wished she could find the resources, find the funding, have the time to sit down and write it, and in all of these kind of things. Whereas here, we did have to purposely sit down and write the signage, but we have a graphic designer, we have the access to print these things internally, all the resources that Coggeshall Farm Museum didn't have at the time. So we're able to present some signage, which is really good, and we're able to essentially use this kind of new kind of pathway for the visitor, starting with a visitor booth, right? The visitor center used to essentially be in the farmhouse, but we disconnected that and we brought it down kind of into its own area. And we were able to get the infrastructure there temporarily. That's things that we'll be working on for next year. And we're able to basically stretch out the experience for the visitor. From our standpoint, it really does extend our knowledge too, so here at Sturbridge, we do consider ourselves a New England museum, right? We talk about New England's history. We have buildings from all over New England here, but we don't tend to talk a lot about coastal agriculture. We don't talk a lot about tenant farming. So this partnership does kind of broaden, our interpretive perspectives and allows, I found every time I sent an interpreter down to Coggeshall, especially early on in the tenure, especially pre-COVID. And we were just wanting, you know, our historian or our horticulture coordinator or our household coordinator or our farm coordinator. You know, all of us made visits down there to kind of brainstorm what the site was like and how much potential the site has. And it really did energize my staff here, just from coming here to Sturbridge day after day after day, you know, going down there and seeing, you know, basically like what Steve described to me is like kind of a blank slate in the sense of we have a lot of opportunity down here. What different pathways can we go? Was really exciting, and allows people to kind of look into advice books from the 1790s, or look for receipts from the 1790s, or look for different breeds, that were around in the 1790s. What kind of livestock was on a coastal farm versus what kind of livestock was in a more a rural inland farm. So it sparked a little bit of curiosity, which I think as lifelong learners we all have. Was really great for both the Coggeshall staff and the staff here at Old Sturbridge Village. And then the last piece I mentioned a couple different times, which I think was one of the linchpins in the success for this year, and I think is going to be kind of a linchpin in success for a Coggeshall farm, long term, is this kind of partnership with experts, right? And the chief one this past year was, of course, the partnership with Natalie Bynes Farm, which is over in Tiverton, which is just a town over. Steve Lake and the board started the relationship in 2019, I believe, Steve, correct? Yeah, so I believe the partnership started in 2019. Then we were able to have Esther, who is the farmer, basically provide the farm with heritage breed pigs throughout the year. On the site itself, she does a lot of work with land improvement as well. So she has chicken tractors and other paddocks where she's kind of improving the ground here. And it's really great because, us as historic interpreters, this is something that I've always tried to lean on here at Old Sturbridge Village too, is that kind of leaning on existing experts, right? So it's not necessarily, because we have educational purposes, of course. We don't necessarily have production purposes. We don't have modern farming purposes. We want to have a farm as a tool to educate. So why not, utilize people that are actually farming in a modern sense, that have all the connections to, all the different resources that you need for farming, all the different connections you need for, livestock and feed and, all the different harnesses and tools and so forth. So Esther has been really great. We've had at any one time anywhere from 2 pigs on site to I think we had 14 or 16 pigs on site at one point, because they were helping us clear out, so some ground in and around the farm, which was really great this year because we weren't able to have larger livestock in the sense of cattle or sheep, because we're still addressing some field fencing, which we're hoping to address in 2021. And one of those things that is definitely one of those lingering things that didn't move as quickly as we would have hoped. But so that's some of managing the museum before I talk too much. All right, and then for special events and kind of events at the farm, right? So Coggeshall Farm had a history of doing events, as most museums have, right? And some of their events were some of the highest visitation, visited days, in the sense of, their Fiber Fest in the springtime, their Harvest Fest, and their Food Festival in the fall time. Those were some of the staple events that that the farm had. They generally celebrated the beginning of the spring season with the maple sugaring weekends in February and March. But we knew that, at Sturbridge Village, of course, just like every other place, events were a big part of our profile too, that we could bring some of the events that we've been doing here at the museum down to Coggeshall Farm. Now, obviously 2020, we had some issues with bringing all of the things down, to Coggeshall. Quite frankly, here in Sturbridge, we weren't able to do a lot of the same things that we traditionally have done, but we did have a couple successes that really does show us that, to build on the success that they currently had or they had historically, we could bring some of our events down there too, and really make sure that that we're utilizing this partnership as best as possible. So, early on in planning for reopening during the pandemic, we were really trying to utilize the museum at all hours of the day to kind of stretch the audience out. So what we decided to do is open up for select nights for evening at the village, which would be based around historical interpreting, based around a little bit of live music at the site with the proper spacing and so forth. We were able to bring this evening at the farm program down to the museum, down to Coggeshall. We only did it one night, but it was a successful night and was our highest attended day up until the point when we brought down our Halloween program, which is another one that here at Sturbridge, Halloween and our programming around Halloween, especially the last 5 years when we've done a theatrical experience, a Sleepy Hollow experience, has been extremely successful for the museum, both in visitor engagement, which is of course first and foremost, the visitors love the event, and then financially, of course, too. It brought in a good amount of net revenue for the museum. We knew that we weren't going to be able to do that theatrical program the same way due to COVID concerns, due to the tightness of the audience, just the design of the show. We weren't going to be able to do it the same way. So what we did instead is we did an adapted version of this show, and you can actually see a couple of the pictures here on this slide were from our program that's called Phantoms in Fire, which was, the core piece of Phantoms in Fire was actually 6 different actors that brought to life 6 different Edgar Allan Poe stories. Once again, minimal site or minimal set other than using the natural set, which is, I think, one of the big successes of this program, is that it was a pretty low cost program, but a really high engagement. We were able to hire 6 actors. We put out a casting call. We work with a director, PJ Griffith, who's been fantastic to work with, and we've worked with him on several different projects here at Sturbridge. And he was able to hire 6 great actors. We were able to put together this program in pretty short order. We did it 8 nights here at Sturbridge Village, and we were planning on doing it 2 nights down at Coggeshall. We did only end up being able to do it 1 night for various different reasons, weather related and COVID related. We saw a tremendous amount of support for that event. We sold out that event at the maximum capacity. So I think we learned a lot from these 2 kind of events down at Coggeshall. And Jim, did you want to talk a little bit about the PPP?
Sure. Thank you, Rhys. So I think, one of the things that the partnership, I think, did for Coggeshall unexpectedly, because we didn't see the pandemic coming when we started this partnership in January of 2020, was to insulate it a little bit from some of the shocks of COVID. So we were able to maintain staff down there, and when the village received a payroll protection loan, we were able to use some of the proceeds of that to keep Coggeshall staff employed, and that kind of kept their resources dry, their powder dry rather, for when it was time to really kind of put people on the ground there. So, and Rhys was able to keep the staff engaged down there, planning for when we were able to reopen to the public in the summer. So, and I do think that these kinds of partnerships, and we'll talk about it in a few slides, and we're just about to finish before we open it to questions, but I think that you have to have, I think, a vision that it's going to work and trust on both sides. And I think that, thanks to the leadership of Steve Lake and the Coggeshall board, there definitely was that mutual trust as we went into this partnership, that we were all operating in the best interests of, both organizations, and flexibility. This year has been unprecedented for us, and it's required us to think a little differently. Some of the plans that we had for Coggeshall for this year, we weren't able to execute, but we were able to do other things that we didn't have on the screen. So, and then Rhys will take us to the next slide. So what has worked? As Rhys pointed out, we have a great staff on the ground at Coggeshall Farm Museum, and making the right hires for this first year was really critical, and I give him a lot of credit for that. He also talked about the fact that the partnership has had a reciprocal energy in that our staff here has gotten some energy from being able to go down there and learn new things and reimagine how interpretation can happen for a coastal farm museum. And the distance actually between our two museums, it's about a 90-minute drive from Sturbridge to Bristol, Rhode Island on a good day. We're far enough away that we are actually able to leverage some of the programs that we do here, as like Phantoms and Fire, bring them to Coggeshall and not be cannibalizing one another's audiences. So it isn't a location that's far enough away from Sturbridge that we can attract new audiences for events that we can't attract necessarily here at the museum. And I think that what we see down there is that for special events, the museum can attract large numbers of people. I mean, we sold out the first Phantoms and Fire performance pretty quickly, and we're selling out the second one when torrential rains, caused us to cancel it. So those are the things that have worked, and there's Rhys, I think, doing some.
Yeah.
And then on the next slide, what's been challenging. So I think that, I think this is true of me in general when we do new projects. I think that the first year probably took longer and needed more time than, we needed more of Rhys's time and some of the other staff members than we initially planned. We should have learned that lesson when we actually opened Old Sturbridge Academy back in 2017, and that took a lot more of everybody's time in the first year than we had planned. So shame on us, but I think that like any startup, you have to make the investment of resource on the front end so that you can reap the benefits later on. And I think that the first year took a little bit more of time and energy than we might have budgeted. And then because of COVID, it just moved more slowly. And I think that we just did not get the ground covered that we were hoping to get. I think when COVID is behind us, we'll be able to change the pace significantly. And then as much as the distance between the two organizations is an advantage in terms of audience and trying to capture new audiences for some of the similar programs, it's a disadvantage for us in that it's hard for us to rally resources to the farm quickly from Old Sturbridge Village. So we learned that there needs to be more planning and coordination between the two museums. Our hope was to be able to rotate some staff with greater nimbleness between the two museums, and the 90-minute drive just made that more challenging for us to do. So, the good news is we're getting better at it, I think, and it is forcing us to do a little more planning and coordination. The tough part is we can't really turn on a dime with the two organizations the way we might have if we were closer together. And then the last slide, I think, is, what do we think the keys were to a successful first year? And in talking with Steve and Rhys in preparation for today's workshop, we kind of boiled it down to 4. And I'll start with the 4th. We had very generous funders who believed in what this partnership could be and stepped up at the front end to give us the funding to be able to hire the staff and put people on the ground and develop some momentum before we had to go out and raise those dollars on our own. So the good news is we are raising money. I haven't even had a chance to tell Steve this, but we just picked up a $40,000 grant for the Farm Museum yesterday. But having some funders at the table who understand the partnership, who understand its potential, and who kind of are there with you to see if you can get that vision going was really critical. Without them, I don't think we would have been able to have the launch that we had this year. The second thing, again, moving up that list, I would say is board support. one of the things that was critical for us from both organizations was unequivocal board support. The village board, once they understood the agreement and what it was going to take and what the opportunities were, are fully on board. Just before this meeting, I was talking to one of the village trustees who was asking how things were going down at Coggeshall Farm. We've had village trustees from around the region visit the farm and show their support. So that's been great. And of course, the Coggeshall Farm board has just been terrific. I mean, they're fully engaged and very supportive of the things that are happening down there. I think if we had a crack in the foundation of support on either side, it could have been an issue, because nobody was really questioning, how much time Rhys was spending on it, how much time I was spending on it. There was not a lot of nickel and diming. And I think that reflected the commitment that both boards had to the organization's partnership. The shared vision that Rhys talked about is absolutely essential. I think we're all committed to this. And then the last piece is, I think that Rhys, I give a lot of credit to, the staff at both museums saw themselves as one team working together. So we were not Coggeshall Farm versus Old Sturbridge Village. It was, hey, we're all in this together, let's make it work. And I think that that's a real credit to Rhys's leadership on the site. So teamwork, having a shared vision and passion for living history, unequivocal board support, so nobody was going to get nervous if things didn't work out the way we had planned. They were still committed to it, and having funders at the table to give us the juice we needed to launch the partnership. So at that point, I think we're at about 2:15, and now I think if folks have questions or comments, we're happy to answer them.
Okay, there's one question on the site is how does sharing development staff work? Is there any competition for donors between OSV and Coggeshall Farm?
Yeah, great question. So we have two of our development staff members are based at Coggeshall Farm. They live in Rhode Island, and so we felt that having them there at that office would enhance teamwork. And then the rest of the development staff is here in Sturbridge with me. And we're strategic about it. I mean, it's a great question. There definitely is a risk to that. What we've tried to do is really qualify potential funders for both organizations to determine what's the best pitch for them. Certainly Coggeshall is going to appeal more to Rhode Island donors who are there and might have an investment in that. There are foundations that are clearly better for Coggeshall Farm Museum than they are for Old Sturbridge Village. But we've also been pitching to funders this year and saying, look, if you fund us for this program here at Old Sturbridge Village, we are going to be able to share that program knowledge and some of that experience with our colleagues down at Coggeshall Farm. So you're going to get even more bang for your buck. So, we have a fairly tightly coordinated development effort. It is absolutely a risk. And we're also raising money for Old Sturbridge Academy. So there are three organizations that we kind of have to do this work with. But I think that, the boards have been great about it. And, this year, I think will be a good, strong fundraising year for Coggeshall, given everything. And it'll probably be one of the best fundraising years for the village at the same time.
Another one for you, Jim. Jim, would you be willing to go into more detail on the full costs of both the contract and additional hires?
Sure. So the additional hires, which would be only the personnel working at the farm, probably in total is about $120 to maybe $110 to $135,000 of payroll. That's all covered by the Farm Museum because of grants and gifts that we were able to secure at the beginning of the year. So the year of staffing was covered by those gifts. On the village side, there aren't any incremental costs to this because the folks who are working on Coggeshall Farm are people who would be working here anyway. There is, of course, opportunity cost, right? So if we take 10 hours of Rhys's time in a given week, that's 10 hours that he's not spending on something else. But we really believe that the investment of that time is going to pay off for us and for Coggeshall, both in terms of brand awareness and kind of synergies that are created by the partnership, but also revenue. I mean, I really do believe that there is a path to revenue growth down there on just about every front. So it's worth the investment now to do that. But the village had no additional cost. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not entirely true. I did get Rhys a truck so that he could go down, but we were going to do that anyway. He just doesn't know it. We did it. We did it for him when we started the partnership there.
All right. Doesn't look like there's any other questions as of yet. I mean, another thing that I just wanted to, just going back to the kind of the special events and what this year, you know, there's so many missed opportunities, I'm sure, you know, was a lot of the theme of a lot of these, you know, sessions in the sense of, you know, what 2020, we really thought that we were going to be able to anchor our summer season with, you know, a summer kind of theatrical, getting families involved, getting the word out there. You know, so I think that there's so much more opportunity that we had in place back in, you know, January, February, early March, that hopefully we'll be able to execute on next year. All right, another question came in. Would you recommend to small historic sites? I don't know.
Yeah, so I and certainly Steve can weigh in on this as well as from the board perspective, but absolutely. I mean, I think we one of the reasons that we approached this pilot is to think, is this a way for museums, or in our case, living history, outdoor history museums, is this a way forward so that we can ensure that these programs are sustainable, you know? And I think that the fact that it is working so far in year one under such difficult circumstances because of the pandemic says to me that it can work. The conditions probably have to be right for it to happen, but I absolutely believe that this is a way forward in terms of sustainability and the most efficient use of resources, right? I mean, we at Old Sturbridge Village, we manage the accounting for not just Coggeshall, but Old Sturbridge Academy and the museum. So we have a fairly large accounting and finance department that can very easily pick up the expenses of a $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 institution. And I don't mean to diminish their work, because their work has been great and they're excellent at it, but we have that capacity here. And so I absolutely think it's a way forward and a great use of resources. And I'll turn it over. I mean, Steve, you're from the board perspective. You can comment on whether you think the investment has been worth it or it's working.
Oh, I think without question, and I know that when we started the conversation and got to the point where we were going to proceed and figure this partnership out, one of the things I realized needed to just put everything on the table. And I think that was the expectation on the part of Sturbridge. So we, you know, warts and all, this is what we have. This is what we've been able to accomplish in the last few years. And I think to the credit of Jim and the really great team that he's assembled at Sturbridge, yes, there were challenges, but I think most of what they really saw was opportunity and the potential that Coggeshall could, on a much smaller scale than Sturbridge, but it could really add to the region's living history offerings. And again, if you're looking from the perspective of a small organization, again, thinking outside of the box, and you know, we had some help with some folks that have been longtime friends of the museum, strategic planners, who said, well, yeah, talk to Sturbridge. They're willing to talk to you. And we all thought, well, that seems like such pie in the sky, but we should. And we did. And you know, the result is that here we are toward the end of the first year. We're all struggling to get to the other side of the pandemic, but it's working, and we're all confident that it's going to continue to just improve and become something that's really meaningful, not only for Rhode Island, but for all of Southern New England and beyond.
Perfect. And one more question came in, which I'm sure all of us would have different kind of answers for, but when you look towards the future, do you have an idea and hope of what your long-term vision of the relationship is, and what would success look like?
Steve, I'll let you start.
Okay. Well, I think what Coggeshall has been since its inception in 1973, and it started initially as a group of historic preservationists that were looking for a way to preserve a 1750s era farmhouse. But I think they quickly realized that just that as the sole focus wouldn't be enough to really sustain the organization. So in the subsequent years, it grew from preservation to interpretation to conservation, and it's just I think that it's been a great thing for Coggeshall, and I think it will continue to be so.
Rhys?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the sharing of knowledge between the staff, I think is huge, and I think that is going to be a continuously, benchmark. The way that I will continue to benchmark a lot of this success. I mean, sure, the raw numbers in the sense of how many visitors we have, how much earned revenue we're able to bring in the door is very important. But I think if we're able to kind of share the skills amongst the staff, if we're able to kind of keep the staff in kind of that same vein of like, we're all doing this living history thing, we're all doing this site specific education, we're all doing this learning through experience and learning through doing and craft. I think that's going to be one of the biggest benchmarks for success from a manager's perspective anyway.
And I guess my response to that would be, I expect we will be in a long-term partnership. The terms of it may change as time goes by and circumstances are different. But I think for me, I always think about in this job, what is the director 25 years from now going to have because of steps that we've taken today? And I think about that for Coggeshall too. I want to see Coggeshall be strong and sustainable, and I want to see a propagation of the faith, right, around history and the love of it and preservation, and more people tied to that farm museum, more and more people tied to Old Sturbridge Village. I could see a school popping up in Rhode Island that looks like Old Sturbridge Academy and leverages, kind of the resources of Coggeshall Farm. So I think that, I think there's a long-term future for the partnership. I'm confident of that, and I think that hopefully when Rhys is sitting in this chair 25 years from now, everything is bulletproof financially down there, which would be great.
So Steve, this one's directly for you. What would have the university partnership looked like?
Well, we had hoped to have, because they have a building and trades department, this particular school we talked to. So part of the conversation we had with them was to bring those folks to the farm to help with constructing a new barn. Again, similar to what in a different way, but very similar to the relationship we have with Old Sturbridge Village, is just bringing kind of the expertise from within the academic community and just the resources they have, sort of the same things that Jim talked about in terms of through the partnership and the management agreement, what assets that Coggeshall didn't have now has because of the partnership. But some of those same types of resources, whether it be in something as simple as insurance, they have a school of, this particular school had historic preservation as one of their programs. And over the years, they had been involved in various projects at Coggeshall Farm. And we just saw that going forward is something that would continue to be a real asset and a resource. So I think many of the same benefits that we've gained from this relationship with you folks at Old Sturbridge Village, many similar types of opportunities that we're experiencing now.
Great. Looks like the questions have quieted down.
Great.
Here's one more. Was there any change in outlook on the Coggeshall board you would share?
Change on
An outlook.
I think really just as much as anything is just being very hopeful about the future of the museum, because as Jim noted, sustainability for every organization is just a real challenge whether you're an Old Sturbridge Village or especially if you're a smaller organization like Coggeshall Farm Museum. There was some early on, one board member in particular was he was trying to figure out what was in it for Old Sturbridge Village. And as Jim noted, it's, similar missions for the two organizations and a way to broaden the audience for not only Sturbridge, but also for Coggeshall Farm. So I think, the outlook was just very, very optimistic. And when it became apparent that this was going to work, everybody was just amazed, and we all thought, well, gosh, we surely wish we had talked to Old Sturbridge Village years ago. But again, I think the outlook has just been that it's just been a win-win, honestly.
All right. Looks like that's it. Yeah.
Well, certainly, we appreciate your coming to the workshop today and your interest, and hopefully you'll visit, Coggeshall Farm Museum in Bristol when we reopen again, hopefully in February for the new season. I think Rhys has got some great plans. And if anyone has any specific questions, related to putting these partnerships together or things that come to you later on, email me. Feel free to give me a call here at the Village. I'd be happy to talk to anyone. I'm sure Steve and Rhys would as well if this is something you're thinking about. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Thank you, Steve, for making the time to be here, and Rhys as well.
Certainly.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.